In addition to fostering a politically toxic climate in Venezuela, the opposition's actions over the past 3 years, such as its refusal to recognize President Nicolas Maduro's April 2013 victory despite absolutely no evidence of electoral fraud, ensuing violence that targeted state-run health clinics and left at least 7 civilians dead. Another wave of violence began in February 2014 that left 43 dead, approximately half of them due to opposition actions and recent repeated calls for military and foreign intervention, all had a very damaging economic effect. The U.S. government has not only cheered and funded these anti-democratic actions by absurdly declaring that Venezuela is an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security and pressuring investors and bankers to steer clear of the Maduro administration, but the White House has prevented Venezuela from obtaining much-needed foreign financing and investment. The main issue that occurred in Venezuela was hyperinflation, which government sources unofficially put at 370% for the past 12 months, and which the IMF estimated will top 700% for 2016, a 40% drop in imports this year, and a 60% drop since 2012. Chronic scarcities of food, basic goods, and medicines with an estimated 80% scarcity index, and a 40% drop in oil export income in 2015. This year, in 2017, will be the most difficult for Venezuela to weather since oil prices collapsed in 2014, dragging the country's economy down with them. Less than 3 months into 2017, Caracas is already grappling with relentless inflation and food shortages, as well as uncertainty that has accompanied the new U.S. administration. In the face of troubles that never seems to be the end, the Venezuelan government has also fended off challenges from its political opponents in the Democratic Unity Roundtable by using offers of conciliation to drive a wedge between them. Caracas' biggest concern, however, is not what the opposition might do next, but what their own armed forces are capable of. The General Directorate of Military Counterintelligence has reportedly begun to monitor mid-ranking military officers deployed to the country's strategic defense zones, which is the Red Eye, also known as REDI, and strategic defense zones, which is known as ZODI, ZODI. Venezuela's 8 Red Eye, which are administered by major generals appointed by the president, contains dozens of ZODI commanded by additional officers. And it is apparently these figures' loyalty that has Caracas worried. The government's primary concern lies in the fact that Red Eye and ZODI officers have room to act and encourage their subordinates to follow without their superiors' immediate knowledge. Red Eye and ZODI commanders have the authority to issue direct orders to the units under their control, and in theory, they could lead military action against the state while keeping the defense minister and strategic operational commander in the dark as to their intentions. In hopes of preventing an uprising from someday unfolding, the government has begun to scrutinize the comings and goings of these units' lower ranks. Now let's get back to the main issue of oil prices in Venezuela. Even if oil prices start to rebound in the years ahead, inflation will still stay high, as well as the country's risk of financial default. And any new sanctions the United States levels against PDVSA, which is known to be the world's worst oil company, will only make matters worse. Rather than trying to fix the unfixable, Venezuela's leaders have adopted the next best approach, banding together and battening down the hatches, as they would say. So far, the government's strategy seems to have worked, though polls suggest that less than a third of Venezuelans support the ruling party. President Nicolas Maduro has managed to avoid widespread unrest and delay regional elections that his party stands a decent chance of losing. The country's unexpected calm can largely be explained by the fact that most would-be protesters spend the majority of their days simply trying to meet their basic needs, such as buying food as it grows increasingly scarce. Without viable opposition parties to rally and coordinate the country's dissatisfied populace, moreover, there are limits to how much damage voters can do to the government's grip on power. Food shortages and high prices, after all, affect the soldiers as much as they do the civilians, particularly as imported goods become few and far between for the average Venezuelan citizen. Military food supplies vary greatly depending on the location, soldiers' ranks, and access to additional funds. And though most of the rank and the file are suffering alongside the rest of the population, the armed forces mid-level and senior leaders probably aren't. Either way, Caracas will continue to keep a wary eye on its military officers as its economic straits grow dire. The Venezuelan government is no stranger to surveilling those who might pose a threat to its rule, and including opposition figures and political activists. And as the hardship breeds popular frustration with Caracas, the ruling administration will continue to keep its gaze on its own forces for fear of the threat rising within. Venezuela's government announced Wednesday, April 36, 2017, that it will go ahead with its threatened withdrawal from the Organization of American States, the regional body whose leader has been one of the fiercest critics of embattled socialist President Nicolas Maduro. The move came on the same day as fierce confrontations in the capital between security forces and anti-government protesters, who staged yet another march amid political unrest that has been blamed for 29 deaths in recent weeks. Clashes were also reported in other Venezuelan cities. Tension has been steadily rising between Venezuela and a group of OAS members that includes the United States, since OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro issued a 75-page report in March accusing Maduro's government of systematically violating human rights. Almagro unsuccessfully urged OAS members to suspend Venezuela unless general elections were held soon. As Venezuela's unrest escalated in recent weeks, Almagro has been outspoken in denouncing the government's response to opposition protests, demanding Maduro hold new elections. Ramon Muchacho, a Caracas area mayor, said at least 22 others were injured in Wednesday's protests, including 14 with traumatic wounds. Elsewhere, children are being evacuated from their school after being exposed to tear gas. In the evening, government officials reported 2 National Guardsmen who were wounded by gunshots in the same part of Caracas where Pernalete Lover was killed earlier. In all, 29 people have been killed, more than 400 injured, and nearly 1,300 detained in the month-long unrest rolling the nation. Hundreds of thousands have been taken to the streets demanding Maduro hold elections and denouncing his government as being responsible for the triple-digit inflation, food shortages, and the rise crime. The protests have frequently ended in violent confrontations with security forces, which have used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds, and there also has been clashes with pro-government groups. Opposition leaders have blamed armed pro-government militias known as colectivos for a number of the deaths, while government officials have accused the opposition of working with criminal gangs to foment unrest. The swell of protests is the most violent seen in Venezuela since 2 months of anti-government demonstration in 2014 that resulted in dozens of deaths. Maduro has called for renewed dialogue, but opposition leaders have discarded that as an option after earlier talks collapsed in December. The tide of unrest shows no signs of diminishing soon, with the opposition lawmakers vowing to march Thursday to the site where Pernalete Lover was killed. Leaders from both sides of the political divide are calling for mass gatherings on May Day so they can discuss this political issue and see if there's anything that they can do to fix it.